All right, guys, I'm live here. Um, hopefully, inshallah, I'll be more consistent going live. It's just that there's so many things going on right now that I really don't have time to go live most of the time. But inshallah, I will make time for it more often than I do right now. So, one thing that I realize is that I really didn't realize how interconnected politics is between gender relations, especially in the West, as far as the West is concerned. Because when I look at politics, to be honest, a lot of times it's one of those things that divides Americans or whatever the case may be. But when you realize it, and when you realize the political parties, they're very much one and the same. They both have the same purpose. They both have the same goal in mind when it comes to the from the American standpoint of it. Um, and that is to I hate to say this, but that is to impose its um its imperialist uh imperialist neoliberal mentality upon the whole world. The only reason why America leaves, for example, Western Europe alone is because of the term that came to my attention from one of our great revolutionaries by the name of Maurice Bishop, who was brutally assassinated by a orchestrated response that the United States, that the CIA was involved in, and that also led to the invasion of the small island of Grenada. And the reason why they invaded was because of the simple fact that you know they call it what they call it is that, oh, we didn't want communism in our backyard, when really all Maurice Bishop was seeking was self-determination, sufficiency, and do it yourself mentality. He wasn't seeking, as the West called it, imperial or communism, and also, the S word, socialism. He wasn't necessarily seeking socialism in the sense of, um, in the sense of USSR style or former USSR style socialism. He was seeking a balance that was going to be conducive to his people and conducive to the overall development of his country. But unfortunately, what I understand, and this comes from a lot of my reading, is I'm going to be honest with you. I really don't like the US, and I'm going to tell you why I don't like the US. I would say 99% of what the US has, right, is basically done through pillaging and done through, unfortunately, these corrupted leaders' compliancy in the pillaging. Um, Today, for example, you had the leaders, you had the Congo actually get invaded, or there was an attempted coup attempt in the Congo. Ironically enough, though, in that coup attempt, you found an American and you found a Congolese who was trained in America in the coup attempt. So it's quite odd, and you would question, hmm, what in the world is this Anglo American doing in a coup attempt in the Congo? It would make you question, like, like why is this guy, right? Why is this guy in the Congo, right? Give me 1 minute. And the conclusion you will have to come to with that is that it was a inside it was like a orchestrated by America, because you have to understand something. Why would a single man, right? A single American man work independently to overtake the Congo in its situation that it's in right now if it wasn't an American inside job? So I hate to say it, but you have to understand that the CIA has its name written all over this, you know? Um so eh, you know, you have to like wonder, like, okay, what would be the point? Again, as I said, what would be a point of one guy working alone? Okay, working alone in this kind of thing. It really wouldn't be a point in having that, right? So, with that being said, one can only guess that yes, it was an inside orchestrated job by America. So, again, this so again, this kind of thing tells us that um eh, America and the West in general have what we call backyardism, where they feel that what's theirs is theirs, right? And then what's ours is theirs. And what I mean by ours is our natural resources, our people, because that's why you have mass immigration in the US and you look at what jobs these immigrants are doing. They fill all types of jobs across the spectrum, right? So you have this kind of mentality, and it's unfortunate, but this is how they think. This is the way they feel. And it unfortunately goes down to gender relations. When you look at, for example, men, we're looked at as disposable by in a lot of societies. Okay, in a lot of societies, men are looked at as disposable in the sense that we're the first ones that go to war. We're the first ones that are the ones who are on the front line of things, right? So this is why we're looked at as disposable. This is why women look at us as like, yeah, disposable for the most part. So, you know, when you look at the American dynamics with men and women, you realize that, you know, this backyardism that we speak about, it trickles down to women as well, because you get to a point where they're now saying, okay, this is mine, this is mine. For example, let's compare the two examples. You take Puerto Rico, for example. You take Haiti, for example. You take Cuba, for example. You take Guatemala, for example. You take Nicaragua, for example. You take El Salvador, for example. You take all these places, for example. America feels like this is mine. What they have going on there, I have the last say on it. No, who gives a crap if they're a different country? Who gives a crap what the people will feel if we uh usher in things that are going to be for our benefit and not for the people's benefit, right? So when you look at the modern woman today, it's on a micro scale. You find this on a micro scale. So, for example, a modern woman today will say, who gives a crap about his feelings? Gives a crap about his money? He'll make it back. Who gives a crap if I'm taking um more than half? He produced the children with me, so therefore I'm entitled to that. Who gives a crap about me cheating? He wasn't there, or he wasn't, something was lacking, therefore I cheated. Who gives a crap? So this kind of thing manifests itself through these women. Okay. um I hate to say it, but it's just very bad out here, man. um and when you look at it, it's not ending well. You know what I mean? It really isn't ending well. When you look at just the United States in general, a lot of its so-called prosperity is not really done through honest means. It's really done through pillaging and things like that. Um, y- you would have to even question the education system, what they're teaching, in the education system, because it seems like, I don't know if these are skits or if they're for real, but when you look at it, it feels like it looks like they don't have a sense of even education, you know? It's weird, but it's sad, but this is the times we're living in right now. These are the times we're living in. This is what was created, unfortunately, but this is how it's going, you know. This is what we got, you know. Um so with that being said, what are we left to do? I don't want to have this defeatist mindset, because I actually watched a very good video about that mindset, about the defeatist mindset. But we have to just operate in a different fashion that is going to be conducive to what we want. In a way, I'm not going to say play the game. What I'm going to say is take what you can from the game and use it to your advantage without hurting other people. Because unfortunately, when we look at American backyardism, it hurts other people. Okay, let's name all the people American backyardism has hurt. It hurt Venezuela, it hurt the Libyans, it hurt the Nicaraguans, it hurt the Guatemalans, it hurt the Hondurans. It hurt every single person, that is involved in backyardism. Okay, now what I'm gonna do right now is I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to see if Google, because I hate to say it, YouTube likes to censor a lot of videos, and YouTube actually likes to keep a lot of videos out of the know. But I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to compare and contrast American backyardism with how these women think, and how you can see a parallel setting with this. I don't know if Maurice Bishop knew what kind of term he was coining when he termed the coin backyardism. Because when I first heard it, that was my first time hearing it. I'm like, wait a minute, I never heard this term before in my life. You know, um, yeah, when I heard that term, I was like, yo, this is the first time I've heard backyardism, as a term. And so I was just, yeah, I was just like really surprised about that. I, and yeah, man. So let's get into it a little bit. Let's kind of get into this and see. And what I will do is I'll start with the Monroe Doctrine. The first thing I'll start with is the Monroe Doctrine, and we're going to get into that. We're going to dissect it, and hopefully it will show it. Hopefully they won't try to censor it. So let's go ahead and get into that. Just give me a moment. Let me share my screen. Hold on. Okay. Let me see. Let me see. Present. Share screen. We will share this screen. Don't mind my cooking videos. Yeah. I was trying to cook something. It turned out okay, but it didn't really turn out the way I wanted to. Um it didn't really turn out the way I wanted it really to turn out. But we'll go ahead and get into it. Okay.
Did you know that the Monroe Doctrine declared that the Western Hemisphere was off limits to European colonization? Well, if not, you're going to find out today. So let's get started.
So it's ironic that the Western Hemisphere was off limits to European colonization, right? But yet Africa was not off limits to European colonization. Uh, Latin America was not um, off limits to European colonization, because when you look at it, um, you had the British, you had the French, you had the Dutch, and you had the Spanish as well. But let's continue. Hold on,
How's it going, everybody?
let me even go a step further. Let me go a step further. Let me see. Okay, here we go. Even better. Let's get into this.
This video briefly explains how the Monroe Doctrine became the justification for American unilateralism and interventions in Latin America. And
So that's another now that's another term that we need to take to the bank is American unilateralism. And when you look at it, when you look at the war in Ukraine, when you look at the conflict in small hat territory, I can't really say it. Um, but when you look at it, right, it has to do with American unilateralism. Who are who are um who are the key protagonists in these kind of things? Who is the one donating the money, sending them military arms, sending them financial means to do the things that they are doing, right? Let's continue.
And I'll use some of the recent developments in Venezuela as an example to explain. January 10, 2019, several heads of state, including the presidents of Cuba, Nicaragua, Bolivia, and El Salvador, attended the swearing in ceremony of Nicolas Maduro for his second term as the president of Venezuela. However, many nations, including the United States, did not recognize Maduro as a legitimate leader. And nearly 2 weeks later, on January 23rd, President Trump recognized Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido as the legitimate president. And in March 2019, in an interview with National Security Advisor John Bolton, CNN's Jake Tapper asked him why President Trump opposes Maduro when he has close ties to authoritarian governments in Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. Listen to John Bolton.
Now, here's the thing about that. Um, the the Venezuela thing, there is a misinformation campaign on that, and the thing is that I Nicholas, like the Bolivarian Revolution, is not authoritarian, but because it didn't like just bend over backward, that's why America is mad at that. Okay, that's why America is upset. But let's continue.
Response.
See as broad a coalition as we can put together to replace Maduro, to replace the whole corrupt regime. That's what we're trying to do.
Well, certainly Maduro is nobody that I would defend in any way. But
Well, that's good to hear.
But do you not see that the United States support for other brutal dictators around the world undermines the credibility of the argument you're making?
No, I don't think it does. I think it's separate. And I think, look, in this administration,
So here's the thing about this when it comes to women. Like the thing is, a woman will say, for example, that men objectify men objectify them, and that men for the most part they look at them as objects and what have you, but at the same time they'll turn around and say that we've come a step forward because now we have um autonomy over our bodies. And what they mean by autonomy over their bodies, that means that they can make of pages and actually sell their bodies for anywhere from $5 a month to like all the way up to $25 a month. So one thing that you can count on the United States in doing a lot of times, and also these Western European countries, is double talk. They're very, very professional when it comes to double talk. Give me 1 minute. So what I'm saying is that when you look at like modern women, for example, if something doesn't fit their agenda, then it's like, no, 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 that's not it, right? But then when it does fit their agenda, yes, yes, that's it. So in this term, like in this fact, and I'm surprised this is on CNN, that the United States does support a lot of oppressive authoritarian regimes. As a Muslim, I have said this before, and I'll say it again. The only business I have in Saudi Arabia is Hajj and Umrah, and that is it. I can't stand the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I can't stand the leadership in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I can't stand the doctrine in which is actually you know d- exported into different parts of Africa, Asia. I can't stand it, one way or another. So, but the United States can stand it because at the end of the day, what are they getting? Cheap oil. Okay, so let's continue.
We're not afraid to use the phrase Monroe Doctrine. This is a country in our hemisphere. It's been the objective of American presidents going back to Ronald Reagan to have a completely democratic hemisphere. I mentioned back at the end of last year that we're looking very much at the troika of tyranny, including Cuba and Nicaragua, as well as.
So the thing is, when you look at what a woman will say, she's like, okay, well, we don't hate men. All we want is equality. But no, they don't want equality. What they want is they basically want authority over men, okay? And they want an authority over everything without having to bear the responsibility of what that authority comes with. That's what they want. In essentially, that's what they want. So when you look at this, and when you look at him and he's saying these things about, okay, well, we want democracy in these places. It's not that they want democracy, they want a leader that's going to be subservient to them. That is what they want. That is what they're after. They're not after democracy per se. you know the, if they were after democracy, yeah, then they would let Venezuela have free and fair elections and things like that. But let's continue.
As Maduro. Part of the problem in Venezuela is the heavy Cuban presence, 20 to 25,000 Cuban security officials by.
No, that's not the problem. The problem is economic sanctions, which you put on Venezuela. That is the problem.
Reports that have been in the public. This is the sort of thing that we find unacceptable.
The doctrine that Bolton cited dates back to the presidency of James Monroe, the fifth president of the United States. In his annual message to Congress in December 1823, President Monroe forewarned European nations against interfering in the affairs of newly independent Latin American nations. This portion of the address about U.S. foreign affairs is known as the Monroe Doctrine. Although the statements were made by President Monroe, the policy was actually drafted by John Quincy Adams, who was his Secretary of State. And this declaration of policy towards Europe did not become known as the Monroe Doctrine until 1850. President Monroe's annual address included several paragraphs about foreign policy in the Western Hemisphere. Many contemporary American newspapers published the entire text of the president's speech as well as analytical articles about foreign affairs. For the most part, newspaper articles praised the president's statements on foreign affairs. But to understand how the Monroe Doctrine became the symbol of American hegemony in the Western Hemisphere, we must look at some of the events that prompted such a declaration. First, the War of 1812. It was an unusual war, and there are at least four distinct versions of it: the British, the American, the Canadian, and the Native American version. Although the War of 1812 was part of a larger European conflict, the United States became involved in a war against Britain. This was America's second and last war against Britain, and it echoed many of the issues and ideologies of the American Revolution. The war ended in a stalemate on the battlefield, and in December 1815, under the mediation of the Russian Tsar, Britain and the United States negotiated the terms of peace and signed the Treaty of Ghent. This peace treaty did not resolve the maritime issues that caused the war. Instead, it merely provided for returning to the state that existed before the war. The treaty contained nothing to suggest that the United States had achieved its goals. While there were no concrete gains for the United States, the War of 1812 produced a new generation of American generals and propelled four men to the presidency: James Monroe, John Quincy Adams, Andrew Jackson, and William Henry Harrison. The war also boosted American self confidence and encouraged American expansionism. Second, in 1821, the Russian Tsar proclaimed that all the area north of the 51st parallel and extending 100 miles into the Pacific would be off limits to non Russians. Americans became very wary of Russian expansion southward from Alaska towards Oregon, and John Quincy Adams refused to accept this claim. Eventually, in 1824, the Russians and Americans managed to settle this dispute to their mutual satisfaction. Third, in Central and South America, revolutions against Spanish rule had been underway for some time. President Monroe feared that Spain would try to reclaim sovereignty in Latin America. Meanwhile, the British were interested in ensuring the demise of Spanish colonialism and mercantilism in order to promote British industrial development.
So the thing is about what America does is that, for example, I'll give you a perfect example. America will support something, right? That necessarily it'll disguise itself and make itself look like the good guy. Like, okay, what we're doing is the right thing, right? But it's really not the right thing. It's really ulterior motive, and that ulterior motive is occupation. Okay, so for example, yes, it will help. For example, it will help these Spanish colonies get independence from Spain, only so it itself can have hegemony over those colonies. Okay, that is the reason why it does that. But let's continue.
Britain wanted access to Latin American markets for its goods. In fact, British Foreign Secretary George Canning formally proposed that Britain and the United States unite on a joint warning to deter Europeans from intervening in Latin America. Although President Monroe and Adams recognized that mercantilism posed an obstacle to economic expansion, the United States opposed cooperation with Great Britain. And Adams noted that the British were not committed to recognizing the new Latin American republics and suspected that the British had imperial motivations themselves. Adams thus
Ironically, right? This is the ironic thing about the whole situation. This is what's ironic. America itself had imperialist intentions when it came to Latin America. That's the funny thing about it, is that America itself wanted to do America basically wanted to do what it was afraid that Britain was going to do to Latin America. That's the funny thing about this, that's the ironic thing about the whole situation. It's like, no, 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 we're fighting for the right cause, but the reality is it was actually fighting so it can have control over the lion's share. It wanted the lion's share of Latin America. That's the thing. That's the funny thing about it. You know, as I said, double talk. And that's what a lot of these women influencers do. Like Six the Goddess, they do double talk where they'll try to advocate for black men, right? But really, it's for their own personal agenda. You have just pearly things, double talk. You'll have Kendra G, double talk. You know, or I can name so many. Fresh and Frit, double talk. Yes.
contended that joint action with Britain could eventually limit American influence and economic growth in Latin America. So consulted with former presidents Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, who urged him to cooperate with Great Britain. But eventually, President Monroe followed the advice of John Quincy Adams and laid out an independent course for the United States. President Monroe outlined three main concepts of the doctrine that were designed to signify a clear break between the New World and Europe. 1. Separate spheres of influence for the Americas and Europe. 2. Non colonization. And 3. Non intervention. The bilateral statement proposed by the British ultimately became a unilateral declaration by the United States. President Monroe stated that the Western Hemisphere was henceforth close to further European colonization. Monroe outlined two separate spheres of influence, the Americas and Europe. The independent lands of the Western Hemisphere would be solely the domain of the United States. If a European nation tried to control or interfere in the affairs of a nation in the Western Hemisphere, the United States would view it as a hostile act. In exchange, the United States pledged to avoid involvement in European affairs. The United States pledged to recognize and avoid interference in the existing European colonies in the Western Hemisphere. The Monroe Doctrine met with tacit British approval. The British Royal Navy enforced it as part of the wider Pax Britannica to secure neutrality of the seas, and this was in line with the developing British policy of laissez faire against mercantilism. Outside the United States, President Monroe's policy did not attract much attention because the United States was not powerful enough to enforce it in the early 19th century. However, in 1865, the Monroe Doctrine was invoked to support Mexican President Benito Juarez to lead a successful revolt against Emperor Maximilian, who had been appointed by the French government. The Monroe Doctrine's greatest extension came with the Roosevelt Corollary in 1904, which announced that henceforth European nations would not be allowed to use force to collect debts owed to them by Latin American nations. Teddy Roosevelt promptly proclaimed the right of the United States to exercise an international police power to curb such wrongdoing. As a result, U.S. Marines were sent into Santo Domingo in 1904, Nicaragua in 1911, and Haiti in 1915 to keep.
So when you look at this, right? When you look at this situation on a micro level, it can be it can be, it can be, we can compare it to how, women have entered the quote unquote manuscript space, right? We can look at it in those kind of lenses that, women have now, bars themselves into the manuscript space and have, you know pretty much infiltrated it in a way that now you would think that, okay, this is a good thing, but really it's not a good thing at all. So that's what happens. That's what we see is the case most of the time. So with that being said, right, with these things being said, um we have to keep in mind, we have to keep in mind that America, right, America is, it has said, it, as you see here, it's basically letting you know that, hey, we're going to do whatever the f we want here, and there's nothing you guys are really going to do about it. Okay, so yeah, we'll occupy Haiti, we'll occupy IAT, right? They'll do that. They'll say, okay, well, no problem, we'll occupy it. Okay, so and this is what they do. This is what they do. Okay, this is, it's unfortunate, but this is Monroe Doctrine 101. Okay, this is modern. Um, this is how it goes. It sucks, but this is the trap. This is what we find ourselves in. If you're from the global South, one person says stop it with this global South stuff. You know, and it was funny because I assume he's AA, but when you listen to him talk about Africa and things like that, when you listen to actually how he talks about Africa and things like that, he talks about it, it seems like, from a opportunist kind of colonial perspective. And I'm like, uh, isn't that something? So here you go. This is where the mentality of these women stem from. Now, I know they're not history buffs. I know they're not history buffs, but this trickles down to them. That's the thing.
Europeans out. And most recently, in March 2019, John Bolton invoked the Monroe Doctrine to extend support to Juan Guaido.
So who is Venezuela's leader? Is it Nicolas Maduro, the man who's ruled since the death of Hugo Chavez 6 years ago? Or is it the opposition leader, Juan Guaido, who declared himself caretaker president and swore to end what he calls a dictatorship? The United States and Canada were quick to back Mr. Guaido, along with Brazil, Argentina, and Colombia. It all comes as Venezuela's long political and economic crisis grinds on. The economy is in freefall. In recent years, millions of Venezuelans have given up hope and left the country.
And we're going to get into that. I'm going to actually that's going to be the next part of this is I'm going to get into what caused the Venezuela economical downturn. And you'll see that a lot of the downturn is not done. It wasn't really done by it wasn't really done by I want to say uh um it wasn't done by the president. That's the thing. You have to understand that it wasn't done by the president. you know so this is what we need to know. And again, for me personally, as African, as someone who is a holder of two, and I'm not saying this to try to flex, but someone who actually holds two passports, one from his country of origin and one for this country, I can surely say that this kind of Western American exceptionalism is something that unfortunately, it hasn't, unfortunately, with me, I had to really sit down with myself and realize that, okay, this is not right. I had to really read into the horrible crimes that America has committed in the name of democracy to really realize that there is no American exceptionalism. I had to sit down and really have a conversation with myself, to understand that. Okay. Because unfortunately, a lot of Africans and a lot of foreigners themselves will buy into, and other foreigners will buy into the idea of American exceptionalism when really there is no such thing as that. There is no such thing. But let's continue.
With huge crowds on the streets of Caracas, this all feels like the most serious threat Mr. Maduro has ever faced. Of course, he has been through some of this before. There were months of street protests in 2014 and again in 2017. Each time the authorities cracked down. Thousands were arrested and scores killed. But the pressures which drove people onto the streets before have all got worse. The shortages, the hyperinflation, the sense that Venezuela is falling apart. The other difference is the international reaction. America has warned the authorities that all options are on the table if they resort to violence. Canada says the Maduro government is now a dictatorship, and the EU is calling for the start of a political process that leads to free and credible elections. Russia has accused the West of gross interference, and of course, a long history of US involvement in Latin America may mean that Washington has to tread carefully.
So let's go into America being the cause of Venezuela. Now let's look at an immigrant from let's look at an immigrant from Venezuela first, and then let's see the cause of of what happened. Give me a moment. I'm gonna go to the bathroom. I'll be right back. It didn't come out the way I wanted it to, but it's fine. It was my first experience. Next time I think I'll do it. All right, sorry about that. But one thing I want to say, right? One thing I want to say is this: is that when you have ideas that go against American exceptionalism, when you have ideas that go against uh, American entitlement, when you have these ideas, you will be ostracized. You will be actually looked at as a threat. You know, um, and me, for example, in my comment section, I get called communist, I get called Marxist, I get called all types of things when really Marxism and communism goes against Islamic doctrine, orthodoxy in Islam. The only Muslim that had ideas that were similar to Karl Marx, His name was Ibn Khaldun. Ibn Khaldun had ideas that were kind of similar to Karl Marx. Okay, this is before Marx was even thought of. But let's continue.
Biden's immigration.
Yes, I regret moving to the US.
4 months ago, this 19-year-old Venezuelan migrant arrived in Washington on one of the initial 120 buses sent by Texas Republican Governor Greg Abbott. Abbott launched the program in April to protest Democrat President Joe Biden's immigration policies. He chartered buses to send recently arrived migrants from the southern border to Washington. Another Republican governor, Arizona's Doug Ducey, followed Abbott's lead. In May, he also began sending migrants to the nation's capital. At the DC bus station back in April, Rosa, which is not her real name, told VOA about her plans.
Work, start fulfilling my dreams, my goals that I have here.
Rosa and her partner's journey to reach the United States was difficult. 4 times during their migration, Rosa thought she was going to lose her baby. The couple crossed the mountainous and dangerous Darien Gap jungle in Colombia, and then 9 countries to face a complex immigration process in the United States.
No era lo que pensaba.
It's not what I thought. The lawyer charges you $10,000 to work with you on an asylum case, then 10 years to be able to leave the country. I don't have a passport. If you don't have a passport here, you're nobody.
Tienes que tener pasaporte.
The couple says they are battling a legal system they were not prepared to face.
Yes, I regret having come to the United States. Everyone thinks that once you arrive in the country, you will see buildings like the ones in New York City.
While some migrants might regret their migration decision, Border Patrol officers say they encountered 207,416 migrants along the southwest border, a 14% drop from May. Of those, 92,274 people were immediately expelled from the United States under a health order named Title 42.
Una cosa es que yo lo cuente.
They think this is the American dream, but it's a dream that, in reality, if something were to happen to me here, this dream was not worth it.
So one thing I want to say is this: when you're here in the America, right? You are you are sold a dream that you come here, you're going to have it easier than a local, but really, it's more difficult. And I'm gonna tell you why. I wasn't one of them because I was young when I came here. But when you come here, like let's say you come from, let's just say Algeria. Let's just say you come from Algeria. So in Algeria, you may have a doctorate in law. You may want to come here and practice law. It doesn't mean anything. Your doctorate in Algeria does not mean squat. Okay. You're starting from the bottom. You're starting with prerequisite courses in university. You're starting with sociology in university. You're not even starting with what you actually specialize in. Okay. That's the main thing that people, I don't think people understand when it comes to coming to the United States. Okay. I think people don't understand that. They overlook that fact. Okay. So this is the thing that you're faced with when you're coming to America. Okay. You know, there are stories of immigrant success stories, right? When they're coming to America. But those immigrant success stories, right? Yeah, some of them, they happen. I'm not going to sit here and lie. They happen. You can make it happen. However, it's not the majority. Okay. What I mean by that is that the median income for like an immigrant, like let's just say, is going to be around like 60,000, right? You're not every immigrant is going to come to America and be in the 6-figure bracket, is what I'm trying to say. Okay. That's what I'm trying to say. For example, I had a friend, right? He got an engineering degree. I believe he got an engineering degree. And he was patient and he ended up getting a job. He ended up getting a job. Now, that job was good and all. Don't get me wrong. That job was good. It was a good job. However, there was a better opportunity for him in Dubai. So what he did is he took that opportunity in Dubai instead of staying in America. You know, that's what he did. He decided that, you know what, forget about it. I'm going to go ahead and take the job in. Um, I'm going to take the job in the Congo. Or, I mean the Dubai. That's what he did. That's what he decided to do. And that job was more better for him because it provided him with um housing, accommodation, and things like that. So he would end up saving more money than he was than he would staying here. So yeah, but let's continue.
Rosa and her partner are required to check in weekly with U.S. immigration officials through a smartphone application. They hope to apply for asylum. In the meantime, they await the birth of their daughter. For VOA News, I'm Malini Barros.
Okay, now let's see what causes mass influx of immigration. They may censor it. Okay, now
recordings just got better. Hey, it's Dana from StreamYard. I'm so excited to announce that
earlier this week, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre blamed the current immigration crisis on a flow of migrants fleeing authoritarian regimes in Latin America and chastised Florida Governor Ron DeSantis for exploiting, quote, victims of communism by flying them to Martha's Vineyard. Let's watch.
Let's remember, these folks are fleeing communism. When you think about Venezuela, what's going on in Venezuela, when you think about what's...
So I want to say something about that too. Let me just say something about this. Most of the for example, Cuba, Maurice Bishop's Grenada, Thomas Sankaра's Burkina Faso, Augustine Neto's Angola, Samora Michel's Mozambique, most of them were not communists, did not identify with communism. What they identify, they were still finding their way. They were still sorting themselves out. With the exception of Cuba and Venezuela, actually, with the exception of Grenada and Venezuela, these countries were not war-torn countries. These countries were not coming those countries were war-torn countries. So you have to understand something. They were rebuilding the countries while still coming up with a something that is suitable for them, a system that was suitable for them. It was not communism. They were not communist ran countries.
Going on in Nicaragua. When you think about what's going on in Cuba, they are fleeing political persecution only to be used as a political pawn by the Florida governor.
So you see the spokesperson they have for this, and it goes back into the agenda of women's empowerment and things like that. Me personally, as someone who has went to Cuba, who has went to Venezuela, the issue is sanctions. It's not communism. It's not socialism. The issue is sanctions. The issue is blockade. Okay, that is the issue.
The way that we see it is alerting Fox News a verdict.
Thank you for having me.
Joining us now to discuss his reaction is co-founder of the Revolutionary Blackout Network, Nick Cruz. Glad to have you with us, Nick.
Thank you for having me on.
So we want to ask you about this question of how much communism is really to blame for the immigrants who have chosen to leave Venezuela. Is the press secretary here accurately describing the motives for so many people leaving the country? What's been going on there?
My first reaction when I saw that, I was thinking, like, is that Sarah Huckabee Sanders? There's literally no difference there between the Biden administration messaging on this issue and Trump's messaging on this issue as well. There's no difference between a Jen Psaki or a Stephanie Graham or the Kareem Jean-Pierre and the Sean Spicers. It's the same thing. The same way that U.S. foreign policy doesn't change between presidents at all. And the idea you're going to blame communism instead of U.S. intervention, all three of those countries she named are countries that the United States has put sanctions on and interfere with. And this is kind of the same thing that Chomsky was saying as well. When you look at Donald Trump and you look at Joe Biden, they mostly have the same foreign policy. When it comes from seeking regime change in Venezuela, sponsoring genocide in Yemen, cozying up with Saudi Arabia, funding and shielding the apartheid state of Israel, their hard-line stance on Iran.
And so, when you look at, for example, a man who has a voice, a man who has respect for himself, a man who wants to be a man who wants to, how should I put it? A man who wants to understand and be self-aware of himself. A woman doesn't like that. A woman, the modern Western woman does not like that at all. Okay. She will treat you different. She will talk to you in any old kind of way. And yes, the way I do it is I just stay away from them in general, and that in itself is another thing, another topic for another day. But yes, I've experienced it. They talk to you any old kind of way. And the reason why they talk to you in any old kind of way is because they know that you'll be compromised if you say something about it. They know that your words will be used against yourself. So this is why, unfortunately, you have to tread lightly when it comes to this situation. Well, let's continue.
Escalating with China, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. How can you blame an economic model for the failures and what happened to the citizens when you guys are illegally seizing their assets and not allowing them to sell their oil on the international market?
So, and then that's the thing about Cuba, for example, they have a blockade. Okay. They have a economic blockade. It's been that way for so long. Okay. Now, when you relate it to the economic blockade in which men have to deal with, if they decide to lay down with a woman here and that woman decides, okay, let me put this dude on child support. In essence, he's in a handicapped situation because he's not going to be able to take care of himself. Okay. And how that works is the simple fact that when you look at child support, and if you don't pay child support, the jail time is a real possibility. But also, what's a real possibility is your wages being garnered. And if your wages are garnished, right, then it leaves you with nothing. You're in a bad situation. It puts you in a very, very bad situation.
You had the Bank of England they just had a sham trial where they said, we like, oh, well, the $1 billion in gold that we stole from Venezuela, we had the right to do that. And it's very telling that you see the same.
And it's the same thing with France and Mali. Do you know that France has no gold reserve? But it has millions of dollars of gold, billions upon billions of dollars of gold, and it's done by stealing it from Mali, stealing it from Burkina Faso. I'll be right back.
Colonial powers, whether it be the UK, Germany, and the United States, imposing their imperial conquest ambitions on the global South. They think they have the right to ruin the lives of Venezuelans, for example, and other countries because they reject their capitalist imperialist political agenda. The Venezuelan people 100% knows what's going on. That's why Nicolas Maduro is stronger than ever. And this is another example of U.S. sanctions failing. They know the United States government is trying to take them down to install far right-wing fascists that is mostly white, that is mostly bourgeoisie, that has been waging an act.
So that's another thing that we have to get into. When it comes to like Afro women, and I've noticed this, this is one thing I've noticed. When it comes to Afro women, and when it comes to the westernized African woman, it's what Fanon said. I think Fanon said, Frantz Fanon said something like black skin, white mind, or something like that. And I do see that, I do see that there is actually a general treatment, a better treatment of quote unquote Anglo people when it comes to when it comes to when it comes to Afro women. For some reason, Afro women feel compelled to treat them better, and don't let it fool you. A lot of people, and this is one of the gross misconceptions. This is a very gross misconception. A lot of people will tell you that Afro women treat Africans better than they do their own men. That is not true. Okay, they treat them just as bad. I myself, and I'm not saying this in the sense that I want someone to feel sorry for me, but I myself was victim of this treatment from them. When they looked at my last name, when they looked at my facial features, when they looked at everything, I was a victim of this. Okay, so don't let it fool you. Okay. They talk and I'm not trying to sow the seeds of dissension or anything like that, but here's the thing that I want to say is that you cannot have unity with someone else, and this is why I don't agree with Pan-Africanists or these pro-blacks. You can't have unity with someone else when you don't even have unity in your own ranks, when your own women don't even like you. Okay, this is why I'm like, okay, yeah, stop it. Just cut it out, But let's continue.
Active class war against Venezuela. When you look at Nicolas Maduro and the socialist revolution that started 20 years ago, that is mostly supported by Black, indigenous, and poor people. And you have the white bourgeoisie who in charge of the media, who run all the companies. They have been waging a class war backed by the United States, backed and supported by the United States. So it's the height of irony. The Democrats and Pierre, they complain about January 6th. If you look at the coups they sponsor in these countries that she listed, that January 6th is child play compared to what we do to Venezuela. We back Bolsonaro, who used to send death squads into Venezuela to assassinate and kill Maduro supporters. You had the hard far-right fascists in Venezuela that was setting left-wing supporters of Nicolas Maduro on fire in the streets.
So, and that did happen, by the way. I want to also say that it also relates to what they do in Ukraine. You know, Ukraine is the same thing. It's the same situation where they have these people where they're supporting these far right these far right people that Ukraine, for example, I'm not saying it was the most like morally upright country, but before the US intervention, it did have a diplomatic election process. But unfortunately, it's unfortunate, but the United States put it into that, and they orchestrated a very fascist coup. It's sad to say it, but yes, that's what happened. And when you look at women in the United States, right? When you look at women in the United States, their hatred of men is very fascist-like. You know what I mean? Their hatred of like men is it echoes fascism. It's sad to say it, but this is what we deal with. This is what we deal with. But let's continue.
These are the people that we support. So the idea that you're going to blame an economic model instead of our actions is ridiculous on face value.
Okay, look, I also oppose many of the policies you just mentioned, the support for regime change. I would get rid of all these sanctions too. But let's not gloss over the long history.
Okay. Give me a minute. Give me 1 second, please.
Of corruption and political persecution by left-wing regimes in all of these countries as well, under policies that have totally immiserated Cuba and Venezuela. It's on and on and on. I think it.
Okay, so again, what we have to understand is that these kind of things that they talk about, right? These kind of these kind of these kind of they talk about, there's persecution and things like that, but it's like bullocks. At the end of the day, it's bullocks. It really is. It really doesn't hold any weight. No government is perfect, right? No government is going to be perfect. But at the same time, we have to look at the cause of like these imperfect governments, and we have to look at the outside causes of these imperfect governments. So when we see the outside cause of it, we understand that, okay, this was not done, this was not done intentionally. Okay, there was an outside, there was an outside influence in this government that led to it being ran the way it's being ran. Okay, but let's continue listening to what Brad has to say.
It's
Cuba.
I think it's laughable to say it's all the
Cuba.
U.S.'s fault.
So Cuba has a higher life expectancy than the United States, a higher literacy rate, a much better healthcare system, despite the fact that the United States stole billions of dollars from them. So I'm asking you, Robbie, what's the excuse for the United States? Of course, there are always missteps that governments make, but the United States is the richest empire that we ever seen. 1 out of 5 children live in poverty in this country.
So one thing I want to say about that is that yes, Cuba has the high literacy rate. Cuba has high life expectancy rate, and the reason why that is because Cuba places a very, very special interest in sports. Okay, you know what's ironic about these women, these modern women, is that they they are so unkept when it comes to staying in shape and things like that, that it's not even funny, but yet they still want a guy that's in shape. Okay, when they themselves don't even exercise. And a country like America that has billions upon billions of dollars for military, billions upon billions of dollars for regime change and things like that, that it doesn't have money for free healthcare. It doesn't have money for free dentistry and things like that. That's why me myself, I went to Cuba to go get my dental work done. You know, my place of employment, unfortunately, wanted to take too much money out of for healthcare and things like that. I'm like, bro, y'all are really like trying to like, y'all are really trying to rob me, you know? So that's why I was like, nah, I'm good on that, bro. But let's continue.
Country. If you look at Skid Row, I am asking you, what is the excuse for the United States? You have Venezuela, you have Cuba, you have all these countries that has been the victim of U.S. economic war that you guys call sanctions. Sanctions is seized warfare. You guys locked out Venezuela from the international market. You blame their economic system. We have the record amount of income inequality in this country that is higher than the era of serfdom. So, Robbie, what's the excuse for capitalists? Who's sanctioning us?
So another thing I want to say about that too is, you know, in America, for example, right? I would never buy a house in America because at the end of the day, bro, it's like if you're in the higher percent of earning, if you're making $250,000, the average home cost in America is $500,000. Okay, if you were to even put $100,000 on a house, you're still gonna have to take out a loan for $400,000. That loan is going to include interest, okay, which makes it go up in price. So this is what I'm saying, that at the end of the day, the juice is not worth the squeeze unless you're buying a house outright in cash, unless you're getting a house for a cheaper price, that you're going to get a fixer upper. Then it's like, okay, it makes sense. All right, it'll make sense. But you have to understand that hopefully in that fixer upper house, you're not going to be spending um more than what the house is worth to fixing it up. That's what you have to understand when it comes to this conundrum that we find ourselves in. But let's continue.
I don't think Skid Row, I mean, the collapse of American cities under progressive liberal democratic regimes is not really an indictment of Trump policies or capitalist policies. I mean, we get to well, if it's so great in Cuba, why are they fleeing here? Why are they crossing shark-infested waters?
Well, Robbie, the point that Nick is making is that, look, if you really think it's the economic systems in Cuba or Venezuela that are so destructive, why not lift sanctions, let them sink or fall on their own merit, and then we could have a legitimate conversation about whether communism fails. But what so many people on the left are frustrated with is that there has never been a communist or socialist government that has been allowed to freely.
So I'm not on the left, I'm not on the right, okay? Like I'm with Islam, and Islam is in between. Maurice Bishop was in between, okay? Maurice Bishop, for example, in Grenada, he wanted socialism, but he still wanted a private market economy as well. He wanted a mixed economy, and that's what I'm for, okay? I'm for a mixed economy. I'm for an economy like for example, when it comes to the African, when it comes to from the African's perspective, I want Africans to have the necessities they need, but also the option to play with the international market without oppressing other people in in playing with the international market. That's what I'm about, okay? That's what I feel is the right thing to do, okay? However, when you look at America and things like that, it doesn't think in those terms at all. But let's continue.
Test the model without the economic war, I love how you put it there, Nick, against them that basically rigs the game from the start.
There's also never been a communist regime that doesn't imprison political dissenters, cause deliberate famine, kill millions of people.
Are you saying that we don't? Are you saying that we don't?
I am not.
So one thing that needs to be said is that even with me, okay, even with me, when I was in the workforce, when I was in the physical workforce where you have to report physically to work, I have since been working remote, and that's been the greatest blessing to my mental health. I'm not going to even lie to you. I know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not put you through something that you cannot, Allah doesn't burden a soul with more than it can take. But I'm telling you, I hate to say it, but I don't like being around like people at work. Okay. I just don't like it. Okay. I like being able to be productive on my own, because it's sad to say it. And Amilcar Cabral put it so beautifully that there's going to always be a opposing force to a productive force. And you would think, right? This is the thing. You would think, and again, I repeat, you would think that if you have a colleague, male or female, that they would be a productive force with you instead of opposing you. I hate to say it, but that's not always the case at work. It's actually the opposite. They don't realize, okay, and this is sad. They don't realize that if you guys work together in unison to achieve the goal, everybody wins. Unfortunately, modern women don't see it this way, right? And men who are enamored, men who are let's just say, just enticed by modern women, just will do anything for attention from modern women, just will do anything to appease the modern women, don't see it that way either. So again, it goes back to the point where, as I was saying, at work, and this relates to the political prisoner thing. At work, I remember showing up one day, and I'm gonna give you a story. At work, I remember showing up one day, and it was on one of the days off that I had. And so what happened was I actually showed up with I actually showed up with a a a Che Guevara. Yeah, I actually showed up with the Che Guevara sweatshirt because yeah, it's my day off. So I just like I was just wearing um yeah, I was just wearing what I wanted to wear, you know? And so what happened was on the day that I did come in, they pulled me into the back office and they said, on your day off, you wore a Che Guevara shirt. And, this raised a concern amongst people that you are a quote unquote a leftist, that you're a communist, all because of a self-expression. And you know what's crazy about that? From that day on, it got me ostracized. It got me ostracized at work. And the reason why I wore Che is because, yeah, at first Che had his words about Black people, okay? But as he became traveling, as he became involved in revolutionary activities, fast forward, Che was trying to learn Swahili to engage in the struggle in the Congo. Che was in Tanzania. Che was holding African babies. So again, these kind of things occur because yeah, maybe someone, is not as traveled, doesn't know the reality. So I became ostracized after that. And I realized that, like, okay, for my self-expression, I'm now looked at putting under a radar. Okay. And that's what happens if you have a difference of opinion from the establishment or a different way of looking at things from the establishment. America doesn't really allow for self-expression, because when you look at even American content creators and stuff like that, it's like mostly a hive mindset. They all follow the same guidelines. But let's continue.
Are you saying that the communists don't? No, I've indicted all of our policy. This is why we can never have honest conversations. I will criticize everything that we do, everything the capitalist West governments do, and then you say, oh, so you're not criticizing them? I'm saying all the sanctions are bad. And then you turn around and excuse political repression under thug-like communist regimes that have killed millions and starved millions. It's ridiculous.
But wait a minute, Robbie.
It's insulting.
Nobody here, we didn't bring up the political oppression because I think the observation that
because you don't want to talk about it. You don't want to concede that it's true.
I'm literally trying to, if you just let me get the sentence out here, Robbie. I think what Nick and I are pointing to is that political repression, all kinds of authoritarian abuses, those are things that exist around the world regardless of political orientation. However, those things are only those things are only brought up. The overwhelming majority of countries in this world are capitalist, and most of the bad things that are happening in this world are happening under capitalism. However, capitalism is never blamed for the bad things that happen in the country. everything that happens in a communist country, per Karine Jean-Pierre's statement, is attributed to communism. You're talking about per capita. America has the largest number of people incarcerated, living in cages, in jails, and anywhere else in the world. Not per capita, but period. Despite not being anywhere near the largest country in the world, we have more people in jails than China. And you can say and dispute Chinese numbers and what's true and what's false and blah, 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 blah. But nobody can dispute the fact that we have an unprecedented and enormous mass incarceration problem. So this is not to excuse anything anywhere, but the point still stands. If you think that communism and socialism are such a unmitigated disaster, why is it that they have not been allowed to go ahead and run their own countries into the ground without American political interference?
Yeah, we shouldn't have American political interference. I agree. I say it every time on this show, but they would not be thriving on their own and have never thrived on their own.
So you realize,
have they had a chance to thrive on their own, though? That's the thing. Have they had a chance to thrive on their own? And that's a lot of things about like what modern women are afraid of about men is that, like, for example, when a woman divorces a man, they don't really want the best for that man. They don't really want him to thrive on his own. I'll give you a story. I had a Senegalese brother. He's my cousin, by the way, distant cousin. Okay. He married a woman, right? It didn't work out, unfortunately. Marriage didn't work out. He went through a rough patch after that marriage, I will say. He went through a very, very rough patch, okay? It was very, very tough for the man. Very, very difficult. I remember seeing him. I remember having him being down a lot of the time, okay? But he came out of the ashes better than before. He actually married back home, okay? And then on top of that, what was the messed up thing is that his ex wanted him back after she saw that he was thriving. And the sad thing is she didn't think that he would be able to come out of that that situation he was in. It's sad, bro, but this is what they do. You know, it's very sad, but this is their mentality, bro. This is their mentality, man. I'm telling you.
Realize that U.S. state policy when they put Cuban embargo on there was to destroy the economy because they didn't want to show an alternative to capitalism. If you capitalists are so confident that communism will fail, why won't you leave it alone, Robbie? Why won't you guys leave it alone?
I mean, I'm not in charge of the policy of the country, man. I would rescind all of the sanctions tomorrow.
So that's another thing too. This is the thing. If America hates capitalism, America hates socialism so much. Like, no, if America hates communism or if America hates just alternate ways of running a country, then why doesn't it leave the way of running that country alone? Why doesn't it just leave it alone? And that's the same thing about that I say about women. Listen, if you hate men so much, why are you always talking about men then? If you guys hate men so much, why are you talking about how men ain't this, men ain't that so much? Just leave us alone. Stop talking about it. Okay? Men don't, okay, maybe a minority of men do it, but the majority of men don't sit around the table talking about how women ain't this, women ain't that. A majority of men don't do that. We don't have time for that because at the end of the day, we know that we're only responsible for ourselves and we're the only ones who are going to like actually help ourselves. That nobody's going to help us. So if you hate men so much, why are you just like sitting around talking about it all the time, man? I never got that. But let's continue.
Well,
and you can't claim that these countries are also authoritarian because imagine what would happen. And you saw Democrats right now prosecuting January 6th protesters. You had the CIA literally sponsor death squads in Venezuela that try to overthrow the president. Do you know what the United States would do if we did the same thing. So get real, Robbie. This is how the real world works. There's no such thing as overt authoritarianism. It's countries upholding their laws. Laws are a thing, Robbie. You can't overthrow a president without consequence.
Well, look, and I think that Robbie does, appreciate that, and to his credit, would if magically we're president of the United States, and maybe this will get him my vote.
A lot of things would be different.
Would lift sanctions on countries like Venezuela, but it seems pretty clear that most people, frankly, regardless of political party in this country, most of our political leaders anyway, would not do the same. And I think it's a really interesting tell about their lack of confidence that all of their narratives around some of these countries would actually,
including a lot of the migrants. So I would absolutely support and have supported forever ending the Cuban embargo. But a lot of the Cuban migrants who come, one of the reasons we don't do that is there's tremendous political pressure on Florida politicians, on Florida Republicans from Cuban migrants who don't want to do that. Can you explain why that is?
Please,
the
Nick.
Cuban bourgeoisie that has been waging a class war, the same people who fled because Fidel Castro wanted to share the resources with the poor, they don't want to lift the Cuban embargo.
Share the resources with the poor sounds like a little bit of a euphemism.
No. Go to Cuba and ask the average Cuban how they feel about the Cuban embargo. So these class traders that moved to Florida, their opinion means nothing. Saying they didn't want to keep the Cuban embargo, does that sound like people who care about the country, Robbie? Or people that support U.S. hegemony and capitalist domination? Like I want.
So I'll tell you a little story about that too. I'll tell you a little story about that. I was actually talking to a Cuban guy. And he was talking. He was in Cuba, and he actually told me. He actually said to me that those Miami, Floridan Cubans aren't the real Cubans. And one thing that you will notice about the Floridan Cuban, the Floridan Cubans, right, is that most of them are what we call of European descent. Most of them are of European descent, okay? That's one thing you have to understand when it comes to them. They're European. So before the revolution in Cuba happened, I hate to say it, but a lot of the it was apartheid. It was basically apartheid system in Cuba before the revolution actually happened.
I want the uplifting of the global working class, and you guys rather destroy the global working class just so you guys can say zingers like communism never worked, that Cuba is failing. Leave these countries alone and allow them to thrive, and then we can talk. Until then, you have to explain to me, Robbie, what's the excuse for the United States for the massive poverty, despite the fact that we have no country sanctioning us? Where's the U.S. embargo, Robbie? But we got Skid Row. We got people without health care. 60,000 Americans die each year because they don't have health care. 300,000 plus could have lived through the COVID pandemic if we had health care. So what's the excuse for the United States? Who's the giant power that has got their boot on our neck? Our ruling class has failed. The central planning model of the United States has failed. So to point the finger at other systems and while you live in an empire that people are starving in is the height of cowardice.
Well,
our ruling class is definitely failing the American people on a lot of the subjects you just mentioned, the crime, drug addiction, etc. So, look, I'm sure we agree on that. And yeah, let's withdraw those policies and see how it shakes out.
Yeah. Well, look, I think we have to leave it there. But thank you so much for joining us, Nick.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me on. Make sure you guys check me out on.
So, I mean, at least the Brad was kind of like, at least he was kind of, I want to say he was kind of objective. I will say that at least he was a little bit objective. I can respect him for that. His objectivity. Okay. So yeah, I can respect that. So let's go to here. Let's see this.
If you're looking to get a degree in IT or cybersecurity, UMGC is waiving their application fee through May 31st. Tuition is actually affordable, and you'll pay zero for digital materials in most courses. Why not explore your options? UMGC.
What exactly is the U.S. up to in Venezuela? A New York Times report from 2018 claims that the Trump administration held secret meetings in 2017 with Venezuelan military officers to discuss their plans to overthrow President Nicolas Maduro. That would not have been the first time a U.S. administration has meddled in Venezuela's affairs. In fact, U.S. involvement in Venezuela dates back decades.
Well, it's not new. As the history record proves, the U.S. has sought regime change in Venezuela since the election of Hugo Chavez.
This has been going on a long time. I think the main difference.
So the thing is about that is that he was elected, though. Like, that's the thing. The thing is about Hugo Chavez is he was actually elected. You know, he was. They actually. He actually the people elected him. Okay. So with that being said, with this being said, right? This goes to show you that America, you know, even if it's like a regular democratic election, they'll still find a way to interfere for some reason. I don't know why, but they just, you know, it's just something they like to do, you know. But let's continue.
Is that the Trump administration is much more aggressive about it and open about it.
But you can't talk about U.S. intervention in Venezuela or even Latin America without mentioning a nearly 200-year-old policy called the Monroe Doctrine.
To put it simply, it basically
back to the Monroe Doctrine. We're going back to the Monroe Doctrine.
Declared that the United States had a kind of supremacy in this hemisphere.
Originally designed to block European powers claiming colonies in Latin America, the Monroe Doctrine was later interpreted to mean the U.S. also claimed the right to overrule the democratic process on the continent through invasions, coups, and CIA covert operations.
The United States is an empire, and so if you're an empire, you want as many countries as possible to line up with you. And so the pawns matter.
And so and that's the thing about it too with modern women. Like, modern women think that they're goddesses. Modern women think that they're queens. So, like, you know, when you have this like entitlement mindset, you feel that, so they feel that if you're not with them, you're against them. And so, you know, this is how they, I don't know if they know this unconsciously or do they know this consciously. This is where they get their this is where they get their mentality from, you know. This is where they get it from, you know what I mean. And so I hold on just a minute. So so and this is again, when you're going against something because there's always an opposite to something. So when it comes to, like, for the case of Africa, self-determination, neocolonialism, cronyism, um, what's that word called? Nepotism goes against that. Okay. So it's the same thing here. Let's continue.
Matter as well in a chess game.
In 2013, Secretary of State John Kerry announced the end of the Monroe Doctrine.
Many years ago, the United States dictated a policy that defined the hemisphere for many years after. We've moved past that era.
But how true is that statement?
It never ended. In terms of foreign policy, there is very little difference between liberal Democrats and conservative Republicans on the matter of exercise of U.S. foreign power in Latin America.
See, that's what I was telling you. So that's why I'm not a right or a leftist, because there's not really a difference in between if you're a conservative or a liberal. There's not really a difference between the two parties. Okay, the only difference is one does it more subtly. Okay, that's the only difference. That's the only difference.
We've had coups supported by Democrats and we've had coups supported by Republicans.
Venezuela also checks another key box of reasons for U.S. intervention: oil. Venezuela's petroleum production reached an all-time high in 1970. A few years later, in 1976, the industry was nationalized.
Venezuela has some of the largest deposits of oil in the world, and potentially that oil could be a great asset, as Mr. Bolton has said, if American companies are able to exploit it. Venezuela was always seen as a very willing ally and also as a constant supply of oil.
But beyond oil, the U.S. was desperate to prevent this former ally from becoming a socialist state.
Venezuela was the beginning of a radical political change in Latin America, beginning in 1998. Venezuela went from being the model democracy, the preferred option that the U.S. promoted in Latin America, a pacted democracy that always supported the U.S., to being its nemesis when the election of Hugo Chavez, who promoted regional integration, national sovereignty, nationalism, and an alternative to the U.S. promotion of free trade and neoliberalism in Latin America.
Okay, here's the thing. I'm cool with free trade, but just don't let it become like exploitative. That's the thing. Like I'm good with free trade. Go ahead, free trade. Okay. But when it becomes exploitative, that's when we have a problem. Hold on. All right. Yeah, I have no problem with free trade. Just don't make it exploitative. But unfortunately, America does not know how not to do it like that. Okay, they make it exploitative. It's sad but true. But let's continue.
Hugo Chavez's election was particularly concerning for the U.S. He not only sought to use Venezuela's oil wealth to fund healthcare, education, and other benefits for the poor, but he also aligned with Cuba's Fidel Castro, Washington's longtime nemesis in Latin America.
So in that sense, Venezuela becomes a thorn in the side of the U.S. And you add to that that the election of Chavez in Venezuela was quickly followed by Lula in Brazil, the Kirchners in Argentina, Correa in Ecuador, Morales in Bolivia, Bachelet in Chile, and you saw a change in the geopolitical character in the landscape of Latin America, and that's threatened the U.S.'s hegemony. So that what's happening now in many cases is an effort to recoup that hegemony, and Venezuela is part of that effort to recover the U.S.'s control and power.
In 2002, after 18 people were killed in an anti-government protest, Venezuelan military officers and opposition leaders staged a coup to overthrow President Chavez. U.S. government officials serving under George W. Bush at the time denied having any prior knowledge of the coup, while American officials said they would not support any extra-constitutional moves to oust Chavez.
There were CIA documents that were made public that showed that the United States government had advanced knowledge of the coup.
Intervention doesn't always rely on force. President Trump announced sanctions on Venezuela's state-run oil industry in an effort to press for change in the country.
What we're focusing on today is disconnecting the illegitimate Maduro regime from the sources of its revenues.
Well, I think that from the very beginning, the U.S. policy towards Venezuela has been one of isolating Venezuela. This was under the Bush, Obama, and now Trump administration. Venezuela depends on oil for about 95% of its export earnings. It takes oil profits, purchases food, brings it back to the country for sale. That means it can be easily intervened and can be easily upended. So sanctions means that the country no longer can, on many levels, be able to utilize its foreign assets to buy food and bring it home.
Yeah, that's it. And that's what I hate to say it, but like if you're a man in America, right, you're actually at a handicap, that I realize, because here's how you're at a handicap. The thing is that a woman's word will always be taken over your word until it's proven that her words were false, which means that you're going to be ostracized, that you're going to be, compartmentalized in a certain way. We saw it with Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. Okay. With that being said, um, uh, you know, with that being said, the ostracization, when someone becomes ostracized, it makes things very difficult for that person to maybe find friends and maybe find assistance, you know? And so this is unfortunately what happened with Venezuela.
Sanctions also means it can't renegotiate its debt. Sanction also means it can't buy on the international market.
After the death of Hugo Chavez in 2013, his former deputy Nicolas Maduro took power. Since then, Venezuela has been rocked by political, financial, and humanitarian crises, and ordinary Venezuelans are bearing the brunt of all of them. The country is facing hyperinflation, poverty, and food shortage. People are struggling to afford basic necessities, including medicine. 3 million Venezuelans have fled to neighboring countries like Colombia and Brazil. While Maduro blames the U.S., critics, including many former supporters and officials of Hugo Chavez, blame corruption and poor governance. President Trump took advantage of.
That's part of it. That can happen. Again, I'm not saying that, like, for example, I'm not saying, with the Thomas Sankara government, when we look at the Thomas Sankara government, right? There were some things that he could have did differently. But at the same time, I think when it comes to the experiment that he was making, right? The matter is that it was trial and error, and he didn't have time to really he didn't really have time to really um um to actually do it. He didn't really have time to, like, learn from his errors. He only had 4 years as a president before he was unfortunately set up. So I'm not saying, what I'm saying is basically that these places, the Venezuelas, the Cubas, to a lesser, well, Eritrea, they're not given time to figure it out because of the West.
The chaos and division in Venezuela to throw his support behind the self-declared interim president Juan Guaido. Keep in mind that the US's involvement in Venezuela fits a long-term pattern of US intervention in Latin American politics.
So you have a long history of U.S. intervention in the region, and it's very anti-democratic, very often supported dictatorships. And in the 21st century, it was mostly against these left governments who were more interested in independence and self-determination than the prior governments that were close to the U.S.
The Trump administration has now called on veteran foreign policy advisor Elliot Abrams to act as special envoy on Venezuela. Abrams certainly has experience in the region, but that experience has not necessarily been in promoting democracy. Throughout the 1980s, he was a key figure in organizing the Reagan administration's support for dictators and death squads in El Salvador, Guatemala, Panama, and Nicaragua. He pleaded guilty in 1991 to 2 counts of misdemeanor for withholding information from Congress about illegal U.S. funding for right-wing Nicaraguan paramilitaries, the Iran-Contra affair.
The selection of Elliot Abrams shows that it's very similar to what they were doing in the 1980s when they were trying to overthrow the elected government of Nicaragua. And there was so much resistance to it, by the way, in the United States, that the Reagan administration had to end up funding the Contras illegally with arms sales to Iran. This is the neocons like John Bolton coming back and just trying to do the same thing all over again.
Whatever the intentions of the United States, the opposition to Maduro is growing and popular. Years of economic mismanagement, corruption, and authoritarian repression of the media and political opposition has drawn even many supporters of Hugo Chavez onto the streets to demand that the government step down. So, is it possible to want change in Venezuela but oppose U.S. involvement in the country?
I agree there needs to be change in Venezuela, but the Venezuelans have to decide that. It's a very slippery.
Okay, let's look at another example. Actually, before we look at that example, give me a minute. Give me a minute. Give me a second. Sorry. And then I'm going to end the video, and maybe we'll make a part 2. And then what I'll do is I'll talk about like I'll give you an example of the women, since this one is just an example of backyardism with America. But give me 1 second. Assalamu alaikum. Okay, let's continue. All right, let's look at this.
Manage money as a family with the Venmo Teen account, available for ages 13 to 17.
It was November 1st, 1950. Two Puerto Rican nationalists walked to the front of Blair House,
guns blazing to assassinate the President of the United States,
who was sleeping upstairs.
A picket on the iron fence.
So this kind of drastic measure, right? The modern woman will call these guys incels, you know, like at this time, the modern woman will call them incels. Like what they're doing is they, you know, this would be like incel like behavior, you know, because although they do want their independence and they felt like, okay, my voice is not being heard, so I have no choice but to do it this way, you know. So this is why we're dealing with these kind of things, and so this is the thing. So with this being said, and I'm not saying I don't advocate violence at all. I don't advocate violence. But some people's language is just unfortunately responded with that some people only understand violence. I'm not saying this about women in the West, but it seems like more and more that you have to be more firm and stern in order for them to get leave me the F alone. Like sometimes you have to get to a point where you're like, yo, I'm not putting up with your crap. And there's going to be consequences for you if you don't leave me alone. Like I hate to say it, but it gets to that point, you know. And I advocate, of course, patience and things like that. And I advocate just staying away from them completely. Okay. But they don't seem to get it. You know, they don't seem to get like, because you had some women even say, I fight men. They've like bragged and say, oh, I fight men. The thing is this, right? This is the thing. What if a man sees that on social media? And unfortunately, what if that man runs into you out of out of a crazy chance, and then he decides, okay, you fight men, you're gonna size me up now? And again, I'm not advocating for that, but I'm just saying that's the message you give across. But let's continue.
Fence is not dogged. The steps and doorway of Blair House bear bullet holes.
Their cause, the full independence of Puerto Rico from the U.S. And 4 years later, 4 Puerto Rican nationalists start shooting on the House floor, shouting, Viva Puerto Rico Libre, long live a free Puerto Rico, while holding the Puerto Rican flag.
Estimates of the numbers of shots fired range from 15 to 30.
Their goal, to demand people pay attention to Puerto Rico's colonial status under U.S. rule. Their message, Puerto Ricans craved independence and were willing to sacrifice their lives to get it.
I'm not sorry for what I did. I'm not sorry.
But wait, aren't Puerto Ricans U.S. citizens? So how did things become so extreme? Well, the answer isn't so simple.
Classic colony under American domination. Part of the United States Empire.
I will do what is necessary for the liberation of Puerto Rico.
The story of Puerto Rico is one filled with U.S. imperialism, exploitation, and secret surveillance by the FBI. It explains how the U.S. asserts its power with no regard for the locals of a country, and how it will do whatever it takes to stay in control. But it's
So one thing I want to say about that too is that, like, when it comes to like the women, American women and westernized women, they don't give a care about a guy's plight. Okay, they can give a rat's butt. Okay, about a guy's plight. Um, they can give a care of they don't give a rat's butt about a guy's mental health. Okay, I've come to accept that, and you know, I thank Allah for Orthodox Islam, you know, for that. But if it wasn't for Orthodox Islam and the canonical laws that we have in Islam, it doesn't matter what kind of political theory you have. It wouldn't be enough for to withstand to weather the storm that you go through with these women. That's just the bottom line. And that you go through with the men who support the women. Okay? Who advocate for them.
It's also a story of unwavering resistance to U.S. colonialism. Take a look at this. It's the New York Puerto Rican Day Parade. What do you notice? Maybe the hundreds of people waving, wearing, and dancing with a Puerto Rican flag. So can you believe that in the 50s, waving that flag meant risking up to 10 years in jail or a massive fine? It was part of U.S. efforts to suppress independence movements on the island. See, this set of islands right here in the Caribbean, with over 3 million people spread across it and almost 6 million Puerto Ricans living in the continental U.S., was once a Spanish colony. Spanish colonialism in Puerto Rico involved the exploitation of the island's indigenous people, the Taíno, and enslaved Africans brought there to mine gold. If you've ever heard a Puerto Rican refer to themselves as Boricua, it stems from the Taíno word Boriquen, which is what the Taíno called Puerto Rico. But after a brutal war over a century ago, Spain gave control of Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines to the U.S., expanding the U.S. empire. Unlike the Philippines, Puerto Rico never gained its full independence from Spain or the U.S. Instead, it's one of the oldest remaining colonies in the world. And the U.S. has done a lot of work to try to hide that reality, like calling it a territory, a commonwealth, and even a protectorate, or making Puerto Ricans U.S. citizens, which some historians believe was a disguise to force Puerto Rican men to join the military before World War I, or passing the gag law, which made it a crime to even mention independence or the overthrow of U.S. rule in Puerto Rico.
So what that means is like when you look at it, right? When you look at things like that, what some women will do, right, in America is they'll give like men little trinkets for them to let their guard down, and then all of a sudden, like they feel like they have another ally, like, oh, okay, we got one. Yes, and this is unfortunate, um but this is what happens. And this is what happens. So this is and then once that person lets their guard down, this is what they're going to deal with. This is just unfortunately how it works.
The purpose was not only to repress what was at that time a really explosive independence movement, but to also, through incarceration and repression, to shore up the vote for this new colonial arrangement.
This colonial arrangement Marisol is talking about is Puerto Rico's current status, a commonwealth or free associated state. Under this arrangement, Puerto Ricans living in the U.S. can vote for the U.S. president, but those on the island can't. To make matters worse, those living on the island have no say in Congress, which has full control over them, and they.
So in a way, it's kind of like the setup in the Caribbean where they're on paper, they're kind of like independent, but they're still belonging to the Commonwealth, meaning that, what they say has to go through a channel that goes back to the Queen. So it's the same thing, same exact thing.
They heavily rely on U.S. imports. The Commonwealth status has ensured that the U.S. looks after its own interests in Puerto Rico rather than doing what is best for Puerto Ricans.
Because we are a territory, we are treated as a second-class citizens.
For years, the U.S. persecuted, imprisoned, and even killed independence supporters, going as far as carrying out one of the longest targeted surveillance programs on U.S. citizens by the U.S. government. It was secretly carried out by the Police Department of Puerto Rico and the FBI's COINTELPRO. Yep, the same COINTELPRO that infiltrated the Black Panthers and assassinated Fred Hampton. COINTELPRO was a covert counterintelligence program run by the FBI designed to disrupt, misdirect, and otherwise neutralize domestic political organizations, usually through illegal measures. In 1960, the FBI sent this internal memo regarding Puerto Ricans. It outlined goals, disruption, and discord, creating doubts about remaining in the independence movement. To accomplish this, the agency needed information concerning their weaknesses, morals, criminal record, children, family life. The program tracked over 150,000 Puerto Ricans and created extensive files on about 16,000 of them. Those records became known as las carpetas. For my non-Spanish speaking friends, that means the files. I know, super imaginative. In 2000, the FBI declassified these files, which revealed over 60 years of suppression of Puerto Rico's independence movement.
This is by spy from the intelligence unit of the police of Puerto Rico.
That's Emilio Pantojas Garcia. He was 21 when his information was sold to the FBI for $15 by someone he played baseball with. In his case, once his name was given to the police, they went to his neighborhood and interviewed people asking if they knew he supported the independence movement. They also told the neighbors he had applied for a gun permit. It was a lie.
By the time I was investigated, there was already this notion that pro-independence people were violent and that they were, the nationalists, the terrorists. What is interesting is that I have no criminal record and that I am not dangerous.
And so that's the one thing that modern women do is they like, especially me. I've been stereotyped for being problematic. I've been stereotyped for being basically misogynist, basically being tyrannical and things like that. And I don't even talk that much outside of, this platform, or to my immediate family, or to someone else in the global south who may share these, share some of my opinions. I don't even talk that much. So when they say these kind of things, it's just it's kind of weird to me. And they'll never say it in my face, but I get word about what's being said about myself, and so again, I will say this. I'll say it before and I'll say it again. I'm not trying to have a defeatist mindset. I'm not trying to have that. But at the same time, right? There's no reason to be with an American or westernized woman. There's no reason to be with one. There's no tangible benefit that you will get from being with one of them. There is no benefit that you will get from them being with a westernized woman. There's none. Okay? There's absolutely none. Okay? None. Nothing. Nothing at all. Therefore, I will not be with one. Therefore, I will not pursue one. Okay? Therefore, I will not and unfortunately, I hate to say it, but I'm going to say it. Muslim women have bought into the sauce, okay? They bought into it. They've really bought into it, okay? And so therefore there's no reason to pursue them because they fear feminism, neoliberalism more than they fear the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Well, let's continue. Okay. They revere social media more than they revere Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They revere clicks and views more than they revere Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
And that I am not violent, but I was now part of a discredited group of people that have been branded. They demonized me.
There were many revolutionary groups that fought for Puerto Rican independence. Young people were a big part of the movement. But one of the most prominent groups was the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party. The group saw independence through activism and armed resistance against the U.S. government and the military. The party thought that by continuously resisting, the U.S. government would find it too costly to maintain control of the island. So in the early 1950s, the Nationalist Party launched a series of revolts in Puerto Rico and the United States. There was the Hajuja uprising, when protesters attacked a local police station in an attempt to ignite a larger rebellion against U.S. rule. The assassination attempt on President Truman occurred 2 days later. In response, the U.S. government unleashed a wave of repression, imprisoning nationalist leaders, members, and sympathizers. Many spent the rest of their lives in prison.
It was crucial that the pro-independence movement was isolated, discredited, and muzzled. Independence was not supposed to be the choicest or the best form of decolonization for the colonial world.
Authorities used the argument that the island would face unimaginable poverty without financial support from the U.S. to validate the neo-colonial status.
This is very bad. There's nothing. There's no work at all.
And that brings us to today.
The U.S. territory of Puerto Rico has giant debt troubles.
Announcing it was unable to pay its debts.
Rico is in the middle of a $70 billion debt crisis.
The national debt in Puerto Rico is over $70 billion.
Economics in Puerto Rico is not for Puerto Ricans, but is for the U.S. and international capital.
A big reason Puerto Rico is in so much debt is that it doesn't have economic sovereignty. Instead, its currency is the US dollar, its businesses are overseen by US federal regulators, and its trade policy is governed by US laws. To put this power into perspective, supplies imported and exported from Puerto Rico have to be put on ships that are US built and owned and crewed by US citizens.
So what happens really, in essence, is that although it's looked at as like a U.S. territory and stuff like that, it doesn't get the benefits of a U.S. territory. So, you know, and this is like one thing that we see like playing out over and over again. You know, and I'll just go back to the backyardism. When you look at, like, for example, male feminists, right? They'll be feminist, okay? They'll say, I'm a male feminist, but they're not going to get the same benefits as a feminist will get, like a female feminist. But they'll say, okay, I'm a male feminist, right? But let's continue.
Making everything in Puerto Rico more expensive than in the States and other Caribbean islands. All of this has contributed to the deep debt, which in turn has given the US government an excuse to further cut out Puerto Ricans from making decisions about their own economy. Instead, the US government asserted its authority by enforcing a US-based finance board known as La Junta.
If you're looking to get a degree in IT or cybersecurity, UMGC is waiving their application fee through May 31st. Tuition is actually affordable, and you'll pay $0 for digital materials in most courses. Why not explore your options? UMGC.
Something that was supposed to help Puerto Rico pay off its debt turned out to be a way for Wall Street and Puerto Rican elites to line their pockets. And although La Junta has reduced the debt, it's been through significant budget cuts to public schools, the healthcare system, and other things that actually benefit those living on the island. On top of that, the island has been hit hard by natural disasters and local government corruption, causing people to leave en masse seeking better opportunities. Today, a majority of Puerto Ricans, about 5.8 million, live in the States. That's almost more than double than on the island.
This feeling that living a good life is increasingly out of reach in Puerto Rico, especially for young people. You know, and that's a form of colonial violence too. That inability to stay in the place where you want to stay, to feel like that place is not for you anymore, is violence. And it's related to this colonial process that's happening in Puerto Rico that values the presence of these rich white investors over the presence of Puerto Ricans, right? And it sees actually the presence of Puerto Ricans as a drain.
Which raises the status debate. Statehood, independence, or some form of its current territorial status, it's not set in stone. Today, independence is only supported by a small number of Puerto Ricans, while more lean towards statehood. The Puerto Rican local government has held many referendums for statehood over the years, with 53% voting yes in 2021. But some critics say these results are flawed, as there's been low voter turnout and controversy around how the choices are phrased for voters. There's also conversations to be had on what Puerto Rican economy completely independent from the US government would look like, and whether that is even possible given the role of Wall Street. But whether it's statehood or independence, Puerto Ricans agree the island's future should be decided by them and not Congress.
The United States will acknowledge its role as a colonizing force.
A proposed bill by Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Nydia Velázquez and Senator Bob Menendez institutes a process for self-determination. In this bill, the Puerto Rican legislature would receive funding to form a group of delegates elected by Puerto Rican voters. They would clearly define the legal options and terms before a final vote on the island's status. It would create a binding process that forces Congress to enact changes that Puerto Ricans voted on.
This is
So, again, America, Europe, and all these places have this kind of mentality, and again, the average American citizen, the average like Western European benefits from it, and they feel that there's nothing wrong with it. Here's the thing: if America citizens were so fed up with what their government is doing, right, there would be clandestine groups getting together to make the changes necessary. But you don't have that in America. But every other place in global South had that. If there was discontent, okay? But yes, when a country was doing the right thing and America did not like the fact that that country was doing the right thing, aka Libya, then that discontent was that discontent was actually manufactured discontent. But now we're going to look at one more thing. Okay, we're going to look at one more thing.
It was November 1st.
That is relevant today. Okay.
Were there not an Israel, the United States of America would have to invent an Israel to protect her interest in the region.
If I were a Jew, I would be a Zionist. As a matter of fact, you don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist.
So with that being said, right, we see why America does what it does, we see why modern women do what they do. Most of them are American. Some of them are first generation, come from immigrant families, but decided to adopt the American mindset. You know what I mean? So again, it's not a surprise, That's the thing. We can't really be surprised at these kind of things, okay? So let's go ahead and continue.
I've had the view for the past 24 years that the only way in which there'll be peace in the Middle East is when the Arab nations know there is no division between the United States and Israel.
What my record has been, it has been unstinted in the defense and support of Israel.
The United States has never and will never lose our resolve. Israel
Will never waver. I'm never going to leave Israel.
For the past 6 months, the images of a genocide out of Gaza have gripped the world. Razed neighborhood after razed neighborhood, mass grave after mass grave, mass slaughter after mass slaughter, fathers carrying their children's body parts in plastic bags.
So I don't want to over exaggerate, but when you look at what America has allowed to happen, when you look at what males have allowed to happen here because they want votes and things like that. The gynocracy has kind of committed like genocide, and I'm gonna tell you why. Number one, when you don't allow a man to be a man, right? What does he become? Number two, when you decide that you're better or so than a man, and you take steps and drastic measures to compete rather than cooperate with a man, what happens? There's many spiritual and psychological forces at play when it comes to these kind of topics, and they cannot be overestimated or underestimated, I say. Okay, but let's continue.
Others screaming, looking for whatever remains of their families, children left without limbs, without faces.
What did these children do wrong? What crime did they commit to deserve tons of bombs on their heads?
While the genocide of the Palestinians.
So one thing I want to say too is that, like, and this is one thing I noticed too. It's sad to say it. This is one thing that's sad to say, is that when it comes to, like, especially when it comes Karen too, Karen as well. When it comes to like Keisha or Karen's like vitriol and their animosity towards me, I said, what do I do? Like, what did I do? I just walked into the room, and you guys have this kind of like this vitriol towards me for no reason. You know, like what did I do? Did I upset you? Just did my presence alone upset you for some reason? Me, and I'm quiet as it comes. Like, I'm just wondering, like, okay, what did I do? It's kind of weird to me, but this is what we're dealing with, of course.
Is carried out by the state and military of Israel, the United States, under the leadership of President Joe Biden, has played the role of its sponsor.
The defense of Israel is still critical, so there's no red line.
We are not going to create any conditions on the support that we are giving Israel to defend itself.
So that's the thing about feminism. That's the thing about women here. No conditions were given. The condition only is that the woman is right and the man is wrong, and that, for example, the woman has the right to not bear the consequences of her actions, even if those actions are bad, even if those actions include of account, even if those actions include being in the corn industry, even if those actions include being a scripper, even if those actions include freezing your eggs. That's it. That's what we can say.
We will always be there by your side.
The United States strongly supports Israel and its right to defend itself from Hamas, and that support is unwavering.
I wanted to ensure, is that still the case, that the administration has no red lines?
That is still the case.
Since October 7th, the United States government has provided billions in military aid to Israel and unwavering political and legal support, both domestically and internationally, in addition to direct military support. But as the Biden administration and the Democratic Party find themselves in a political crisis in the middle of an election year, there's been a specific media narrative shift on who's actually running the show.
Nobody expects Prime Minister Netanyahu to do the things that must be done to break the cycle of violence.
It's curious to me to see Netanyahu talk the way he does when he tried to interfere in American elections.
We can go down the list.
I'm surprised that they were bold enough to even say that, though. Yo, that's crazy that they were bold enough to say that he interfered in elections. You know, that's crazy. You know, that they would actually admit that, you know. That's unbelievable that they would actually admit that that dude actually interfered with elections. That's unbelievable, bro. That's wow. I mean, they actually admitted to him like him actually like interfering with elections? I wonder if that would go down well with them though. That's the thing. Like, is that going to go down well? Like, is that going to be okay with him? That they actually admitted to uh you know going down, admitting elections. But okay, admitting election interference, but let's continue.
Of what Bibi Netanyahu has done to make Israel weaker, to make them open to that attack.
This line isn't necessarily new, but it actively erases not only U.S. culpability in the genocide of Palestinians, but Joe Biden's own ideological support of it, and what his legacy should and will be.
There's no apology to be made. None.
Welcome to Backspace, where we look at how the story is told in the headlines, and then we think about how we can tell it a little differently.
After this, I'll go. I know I've been going on a long time, and I don't think anybody who catches the replay is going to watch it that long. But this is just one of those things.
On March 18th, the Washington Post published this article detailing how President Joe Biden had found himself deeply entangled in a war he does not want and that threatened to become a defining element of his tenure. The article, drawing from 20 interviews from administration officials and external advisors, reported that the Biden administration was well aware 3 weeks into Israel's bombardment of Gaza that civilian structures were being targeted and that there was no actual plan presented by the Israelis to defeat Hamas. All this while the administration was publicly giving Israel a carte blanche to do whatever it wanted in Gaza, all while it approved more than 100 military arms sales. The article, however, relies on what has become a popular refrain from not just this administration, but also the Democratic Party, the idea that President Joe Biden, and thus the United States, is beholden to the whims of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Netanyahu, I think, made a huge mistake by making himself a partisan figure. Netanyahu's interest, in a way, politically speaking, is to prolong the war. And right now, that's a direct conflict with the Democrats and Joe Biden.
What is the president of the United States to do with an ally like that?
Israel has a prime minister now who is incapable, unwilling, and in many ways politically unable to articulate such a vision.
Netanyahu's not listening to us, and he's a part of a rather extremist project.
The goals of President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu are fundamentally at odds.
No more money to Netanyahu's war machine.
Now, there are three.
No, and then that's the thing. You will have some guys you will have some guys who will try to play both sides of the coin, but really, this needs not to be overestimated, because of the simple fact that, bro, they all feel the same. Okay, I'm telling you, they all feel the same. They all feel they're all in on it. So Bernie Sanders might sit here and sound high and mighty, and hold on. Hold on just a minute. Let's continue.
Problems with this framing. First, it reduces the blame of not just the genocide unfolding in Gaza, but also the occupation, system of apartheid, the land theft, ethnic cleansing, to one person, Netanyahu. It furthers this idea that, hey, this isn't Israel. This isn't democratic Israel. This is Netanyahu. He's the problem here. And so if Netanyahu is the problem, if he's gone, like Schumer alluded to, then, well, there is no issue. And we're back on track to a two-state solution status quo where there is actually only one state, Israel. This purposely erases not only 75 years of history, but also ignores what are core truths about Israel as a nation from the day it was founded, especially that there is no room for Palestinians and Palestinian self-determination. While Israeli polls find little support in Israel for...
You know what's sad about this? There was a nation, Palestine, before this. And so it's like, it makes no sense that they have to be self-determined now.
For Netanyahu himself, his government's genocidal war has continued to be overwhelmingly popular amongst Israeli Jews. 2/3 oppose ending the occupation, 2/3 oppose aid reaching Palestinians in Gaza, and 80% believe that the suffering of Palestinians in Gaza shouldn't be taken into consideration over the course of the war. The second problem with the focus on Netanyahu as the issue is that it presents the United States as not only having no leverage on Israel, but also that the foreign policy of the world's most powerful country and military is being controlled by a small country that militarily depends on aid from it to survive. And you'd think that these folks would be a little bit more careful about the consequences of rolling out something that sounds a lot like a Israel controls America trope. And the third problem with reducing all of this, everything we have seen unfold for the last 6 months, especially to just Netanyahu's belligerence, is that it erases American direct culpability in this genocide, a genocide that would not be possible without the United States. It also requires that we ignore everything Biden himself is saying and has said and done for decades.
Early on when I was a kid, I'd say, when I was a young senator, I'd say, if I were a Jew, I'd be a Zionist. I am a Zionist.
Were I a Jew, I would be a Zionist. And my father pointed out to me, I did not need to be a Jew to be a Zionist. You need not be a Jew to be a Zionist. I'm a Zionist.
Joe Biden is, inarguably, the most pro-Israel president in U.S. history. From his days as a senator to his tenure now as president, Biden has openly and repeatedly made his commitment to Israel as not just a country, but as a necessity known.
I don't think there's any senator who's ever done more fundraisers for AIPAC or gone around the country more for AIPAC.
And while we know that the Israel lobby plays a massive political role in the United States in a bipartisan way, Biden has never really needed the lobby. By his own admission, the roots of his affinity for and belief in Israel started when he was a child, listening to his father extol the virtue and necessity of a Jewish state post-World War II.
The miracle of Israel.
So I wonder if his father was a one of those people then, you know, if he's like so much into it.
Is Israel. It's Israel itself. The hope it inspires. The light it represents to the world.
There's an infamous story about Biden's zeal for Israel told by Menachem Begin, who was the 6th prime minister of Israel and the former leader of the Irgun, the Zionist paramilitary group responsible for some of the most notorious massacres in the 1948 ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. In 1982, as Israel was conducting a devastating aerial bombardment of Beirut, Begin met with a young Senator Joe Biden from Delaware. According to Begin, Biden applauded the Israeli aggression in Lebanon and said that he personally would have bombed more, even if it meant killing more women and children.
Wow.
For perspective, then U.S. President Ronald Reagan would go on to call Israel's actions in Lebanon a Holocaust.
Children are not avenged by the murder of other children.
During his 36-year...
Imagine Ronald Reagan, out of all the people who like talk down on this, you wouldn't expect it coming from Ronald Reagan. You know, that's crazy, bro. That's funny, actually. That's funny. That's actually funny, bro. But let's continue.
Career as a senator, Biden became the top recipient to receive money from the Israel lobby, something he, as vice president, even boasted about at a dinner in front of more than 2,000 members of the American Jewish community in 2011. But Biden's commitment to Israel really came to a head and changed the course of American-Israeli relations when he became vice president in 2008. The presidency of Barack Obama marked a critical moment in U.S. history. He was seen as this fresh-faced future vision for a country that, after suffering the worst attack on its soil since World War II, had plunged itself into political and economic disaster.
2 wars, a planet in peril, the worst financial crisis in a century.
But while so much hope and change rested on the young senator's shoulders during his campaign, he was missing experience, especially in foreign policy.
With relatively little foreign policy experience of your own, how will you rely on so many Clinton advisors and still deliver the kind of break from the past that you're promising voters?
Well, I am.
I want to hear that.
Well, Hillary, I'm looking forward to you advising me as well.
And that's where Joe Biden came in, the senator from Delaware who was known as the foreign policy guy. Biden was the architect for President Obama's foreign policy, a foreign policy that, while focused on diplomacy, also expanded America's war footprint across the world. It was also a foreign policy that made Obama one of the most pro-Israel presidents in U.S. history. Despite Obama's well-known dislike of also then Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and their tumultuous relationship, especially over the Iran deal, his presidency saw the relationship between Israel and the United States reach unprecedented heights, especially in military support. As almost a parting gift, the Obama administration left Israel with a $38 billion military aid package, the biggest in U.S. history.
No president has done as much for Israel's security as President Obama.
In a 2020
So with that being said, again, okay, so again, when you look at when you look at like white or black women in America and things like that, they'll swear up and down, right, that they are like for black men, that they are for, their own, but their actions tell a different story. And this was the case with Barack Obama. And so, yeah. Well, let's continue.
2020 article for Jewish Currents, Peter Beinart noted that Vice President Biden actively and repeatedly shielded Netanyahu from any consequences and criticism from President Obama. Biden wanted Obama to show stronger support for Israel and its right to defend itself. Beinart, in his piece, ultimately argued that were he to be the Democratic nominee, Biden would set back any progress the Democrats may have made ideologically on defending the Israeli government. That rupture, for many, became evident in President Barack Obama's strikingly different approach to Israel and the United States' response to the October 7th attacks.
And what is also true is that the occupation and what's happening to Palestinians is unbearable. All of us have are complicit to some degree. I look at this and I think back, what could I have done during my presidency to move this forward?
And so what happened with Biden's presidency? What have the Palestinians gotten, the Israelis? The Donald J. Trump presidency was undoubtedly disastrous for Palestinians. It saw the expansion of settlements, the Abraham Accords, the move of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, and the defunding of UNRWA.
So don't think that, for example, Trump is any different in that he puts America first. You'll be disappointed.
The Biden administration, having campaigned as the antidote to MAGA, did little to reverse much of the previous administration's extreme policies. Instead, it embraced most of them and set them as the new status quo, until now. Over the last 6 months, the Biden administration has created a new normal in the American approach to the Israeli occupation of Palestine, that of genocide. While the administration has spent those 6 months saying that they have some concerns about Israel's conduct, there is nothing this president and the administration have done to show that they have any other interest than the continuation of the genocide in Gaza. And they can't just throw that blame on Netanyahu. After all, was it Netanyahu who made Biden say that he saw with his own eyes beheaded Israeli babies? Was it Netanyahu who made Biden say that he has no notion that the Palestinians are telling the truth about their number of dead? Was it Netanyahu who made Biden flood arms into Israel, who made Biden and Blinken bypass Congress twice on emergency weapons sales to Israel, push for an $18 billion military aid package, have every spokesperson of the administration get up in front of journalists and cover for Israel's documented and undeniable war crimes? And was it Netanyahu who made former Clinton advisor Aaron David Miller say in an interview with The New Yorker that Biden does not hold Palestinians as equals to Israelis? It took one.
So, and that's, it's unfortunate, but it's really unfortunate. But when you look at it, men and women are equal in the sense of, like, they have the ability to be equal in the sense of when it comes to morality, when it comes to spiritual excellence, when it comes to, like, those kind of things, when it comes to integrity, when it comes to the things that basically are done, like the things that are that we're responsible for, that we have to cultivate, right? Men and women are equal in those regards. Okay, they have the potential to be equal in those regards, right? However, women in this country do not think that it is possible, and that they have a moral superiority over men. And also, when you look at it, they feel like they have also physical superiority over men. And so this goes into how Biden feels about Palestinian. Like, oh, well, it's kind of like the 3/5 compromise type thing,
phone call from Biden to Netanyahu following the World Central Kitchen massacre to make Israel temporarily open up 3 aid corridors to allow food and medical supplies into North Gaza, which it has been starving for months. And we're supposed to believe this president is just paralyzed from doing anything to alleviate the suffering of Palestinians? To stop this genocide? Really? The U.S. news coverage of Joe Biden's role in this genocide has to change. And that change begins with reckoning with the simple truth that Gaza is Joe Biden's genocide.
So I'm just going to say, yeah, that's it for now. Sorry for how long it's been, this video. But inshallah, what I'll do is the second part, which may happen on Thursday. I will talk about, there'll be a part 2 about how the backyardism goes into gender relations, and I'll take some videos with the opposite gender showing how backyardism happens and how it affects us. But anyhow, that's all I got for now, guys. Leave your thoughts, leave your comments. Thank you. Forgive me if I said anything wrong. If I said anything right, it came from Allah. Astaghfirullahi wa atubu ilayk. La ilaha illa anta subhanaka inni min kuntu min dhalimin. Allahumma salli ala sayyidina Muhammad fi awwalin wa akhirin wa yawmiddin. Injarama.